Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. In this episode, we are talking to the marvellous Janie Van Hool. And we're going to be talking a lot about listening. And it's one of those subjects that, as she says, it's not new and it's not particularly sexy as a subject, yet it's one of those things that can really make a massive difference to how we feel when we are listened to and how we make others feel when we listen to them, and how listening really builds our curiosity, our understanding of other people, how it is the fundamental part of building great relationships, where we can recognise people, where we can have a really deep and meaningful conversation and not just talk about some of the transactional things that we need to get done in our working life. We talk a bit about paying attention, and I really hope that it's interesting for you. Do have a listen, and I will pop back on at the end and talk about what I'm taking away from this session. Today we have the fabulous Janie Van Hool joining us, and we're going to get into a great conversation and talk a bit more about listening, which is what our listeners are doing right now. Janie, I would love to hand over to you to introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a bit of your backstory and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you very much for having me. It's so lovely to be here. And actually, I think I'm going to describe myself as on my fourth career, because I'm actually you mentioned listening. I'm writing a book about listening, which is, I suppose, a bit of an anomaly, really, writing about listening when actually I suppose it's much more of a spoken and listening exchange. But I'm writing a book about listening, but I'm late to the party. To be honest, I didn't learn how to listen until I was 50, or I didn't learn consciously how to listen until I was 50 when I trained with the Samaritans as a listening volunteer. But actually, what writing the book has helped me with is realizing that all my careers to this date have been about listening. Because I started out as an actress. I was a classically trained actress, went to RADA, did lots of Shakespeare. First job was in Iraq as in Twelfth Night, which was very funny. And so I was an actress for 12 years, and then I had a couple of kids, and that ruined my acting dreams because I had to stay at home with the kids because I loved them so much, actually. So that was fine. But I took a master's degree in voice because I thought I could still work in the business as a voice teacher, dialect coach. And then a couple of really funny things happened whilst I was doing it. The first one was that I was invited to teach a workshop in the Bronx in New York, working with women coming off state benefits, and the ambition was to help these women get confident in their interviews. And I'd never done anything like that before, Beth, to be honest. And I brought a linen suit from Marks and Spencer's. And in the Bronx, there was no air conditioning in this room, and there had a load of women in the room, and I stood at the front and started to introduce myself, and they just all started talking to each other because they were just obviously really bored by my approach. And I realized I was going to have to do something, so I just took my shoes off and stood on the desk and started talking about being a mum and the confidence that comes with that. And actually, they were just wonderful. They were absolutely wonderful. It was a totally transformative experience when I realized that I loved teaching and that I could find a way of helping people communicate. So that was precious and priceless. And then about 2 months later, I met a wonderful woman on a beach in Norfolk who happened to be head of management development for a bank. And she asked me if I'd be willing to do some work with the chief exec of the bank that she worked with, because she said he wasn't a very good communicator. And to be honest, I'd had a couple and I had alcohol confidence, and I just dived in, and it was so exciting and transformative. And then I spent 20 years working in business with leaders on developing their confidence and communication. And of course, for the last 20 years, that's really been about, how do I project myself with authority and dynamism and confidence? And whilst that's been absolutely wonderful, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been thinking, this is the balance is out. It's just all about projecting, and there's not enough focus on listening. And then, coincidentally trained with the Samaritans. And so here I am today, trying to keep the scales evenly evenly managed between the two. So it's, yes, I describe this then as I think my fourth career: actress, voice teacher, business coach, and now, well, and now listener, I guess. I would like to describe myself as a listener.
Love
But I'm
that.
talking, so so
Well, you have
obviously I'm
come on
rubbish
here to
at
talk.
it.
I'm really fascinated about this subject of listening and kind of really listening and rather than, it's so easy, isn't it? Especially at the moment where we're doing things online and we're not kind of face to face with people, to actually not really listen. And tell us a little bit more about what you have discovered in this fourth stage of your career, about what listening can give you and how it can give you that work joy.
I mean, can I just say, actually, I love the title WorkJoy, and I'm really glad to talk about listening in the context of just that, because my concern is that it can be perceived in that kind of therapy thing, that kind of you've got to be a super contemplative, I sit back, I there's something quite earnest about the perception of listening, whereas actually listening is so full of joyful opportunities because it unleashes the curiosity within. Do you know what I mean? There is so much that is fascinating to discover about everybody. And my concern at work sometimes is everyone's so driven by, I've got to get this done, I've got to get that done, that it halts the joy, because we're not really finding out about what's underneath the surface. And I am particularly, well, I mean, we're back to the scales really. I'm particularly concerned about the online experience, because actually I think people are meeting online to transact. It's like, what do we need to do? And they're going from meeting to meeting to meeting. I think none of them are memorable. If you think back and you've been in 8 meetings over the course of a day, how is one going to be distinct from the other? Because it's just all about stuff. Whereas I think we've really got to shift. I think we've really got to shift our way of being in these workplace conversations, because we've got to acknowledge the value of really listening, and just chewing the fat, in the way that through history people have got together and just chewed over stuff, sorted stuff just by going deeper. And I think we're missing quite a lot of that at the moment. And it is a real opportunity for joy, because everybody's so wise. Everybody's got so much to offer. And we haven't got the time to really pay attention.
So interesting. And I put some of those meetings into the bucket of stuff and things. We're going to talk about stuff and things, but we're not really going to get anywhere with anything.
Yeah.
We're just going to update each other. Everyone is half listening and half doing their emails or writing something or trying to eat their lunch through the meeting. And we're not really getting anywhere with it.
No.
We're not really understanding what the challenge is or the issue is. We're not really understanding what each other's opinions or thoughts or amazing,
Mm,
brilliant ideas or creativity comes into it.
yeah.
So I totally feel that. But equally, I've probably felt that in some meetings in person as well,
Yeah.
about, are people really paying attention? There's been so many people bringing laptops and sitting behind a laptop at work, in a meeting, and typing at the same time, and you're like, are they typing about what we're talking about, or are they sending an email? And
Yeah.
and we're still not actually really listening to each other
No.
anyway.
No, and I think that's where there is some craft that needs paying attention to. I was watching a client's video clips yesterday, and this person was asked a question and then took a full 4.5 minutes to answer it. And you know how in the Teams thing you can see everybody's pictures along the bottom of the screen, the slide is filling
Yeah.
the screen, and I was watching the reactions of others, and they looked like they were, well, how can I say this? They were looking at the screen, but they were doing other things. They were
Mm.
rearranging stuff on their desk. They were looking out the window. I just, you could just tell looking at them that this lengthy response was too it was too much for them, and they'd lost their attention. And I think, I don't think Teams is particularly helpful on that, because the screen is full of slide and you can just see people drifting off I mean, absolutely, Beth, in the way that we could when we were in the room, but wow.
It's also very much easier, isn't it, to turn your camera off for a bit
Yeah,
and go and do what you need to do while yeah, while
yeah,
someone else is,
yeah.
talking. So tell me a little bit more about this craft idea. So what have you discovered in your throughout your career? Because as you said, it's all been kind of leading up to this point about listening. What have you discovered are some of the ways that we can get better at this and get more out of things if we focus on listening rather than focus on projecting or having confidence and being in that zone?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually written about this in my book. I think one of the challenges is not new and it's not sexy. Do you know what I mean? We kind of we know that we're supposed to do it, but actually, because we're not taught it from an early age, it feels a bit elusive. So we only really listen if something is absolutely relevant to us. And so I think as communicators, we've got to take responsibility for trying to make stuff more relevant, trying to decide, I think for leaders, for example, in organizations, don't just speak to your leadership team, find out what is relevant to people all through the business. It's really about opening up the organization to conversations with different people, different voices. I think there is a risk, particularly when we're very busy, that we just listen to the same voices. So one of the first and most easy things we can do is to have different conversations with different people. Actually, do you know, I'm reminded of years ago when I was pregnant and I was an actress. I used to temp as a receptionist for an advertising agency, and the leadership of the advertising agency were great, actually, and they were hugely respectful of me, and they would come and ask me about the people that had been waiting for them in the reception room, whether it was new clients, whether it was potential new hires. They would ask my view, and it was fascinating how people interact with the receptionist. And I
Yeah.
remember meeting a banker at a bank who I was checking in with the receptionist, and she said, "Oh, you're seeing him?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "What's he like?" And I I just said, "What do you mean? What's he like?" And she said, "Oh, I've never met him, because the leadership team come in through the other entrance." And I mean, that feels, I don't know if that even happens anymore, but I just think one of the first principles of any craft is to really open up the conversation. So that, I would say, would be step one. Start having random conversations with people, and find out what they think. Back to the floor.
Yeah. And in the digital world, that's about being proactive, isn't it? And about having some conversations with some people that
Mhm.
isn't transactional, that
Yeah,
hasn't got an agenda, like the agendaless catch up, like you would have if you were casually meeting someone by the coffee machine or
yeah,
kind of the water cooler chats or, wherever it is in the corridor conversations, all of those things that
yeah,
if we are, not everyone is working completely digitally at the moment, but a lot of people who are based in offices are doing that kind of work, is those random connections, the random conversations, the unplanned, the unagendered.
yeah. I
You
mean,
have to plan them now.
yeah, and I think that's really interesting, actually. I don't know if you've read *Sapiens*, the Noah Yuval Hari book, which,
Yeah.
oh God, it's a bit of a wade for me, because I'm not that smart, but I did love the way it was written. I remember thinking there was a whole piece about the importance of gossip, and not in a negative way, but that those light conversations where we talk about each other, and others' experiences, there's tremendous joy in that. Oh, did you know so and so got a promotion? Or have you seen so and so's red jumper? Wow, and there's a huge energy around that is missing at the moment. And I wonder if when we eventually, and let's hope it's soon, get to go back to the office. I don't know, even if it's just like 2 days a week or something. I wonder if those will be the opportunities to gossip, to connect, to form relationships. And then when we're at home, we can have these more transactional, let's get stuff done. Um, but we need that space. We need that space to create relationships, or the organization has to allow people to choreograph it into their day. And
Yeah.
as a piece of craft, I would say that's the other thing that's really important, is to be more disciplined about the choreography. It is fine in an hour's meeting if half an hour of it is how are you? No, really, how are you? And the other half an hour is maybe sorting out stuff.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when you talk about gossip there, and I just want to land it in my head a little bit. Is that gossip is one of those words that we assume is negative.
Mm,
And I talked the other day to somebody about the idea of the word selfish. We always assume it's negative, but sometimes it's exactly what we need to do make the right decisions. We just
mm,
don't have a good word for it. But gossip is one of those things that we assume it's negative. We assume it's people talking badly about each other. But actually, so much gossip is actually just sharing information.
mm,
Did you know that somebody got engaged? Did you know that they've done something amazing? And that, you're right, the energy that comes from those conversations
mm,
and the little spark of joy that people get that then helps them do an amazing bit of work that afternoon or that morning or whenever they are, is something that is really, really important. And humans need connection. It's
mm,
part of what we all need. And however much you kind of like working on your own, you still need some kind of human interaction, some human connection. And to go beyond the, that you talk about that, even if the first half hour of the meeting is having a real conversation, rather than the how are you, yeah, I'm fine, when actually you're not, or when actually you need some help, or you don't really know what's going on, or you're confused,
yeah.
to be able to give it a little bit of space.
Yeah, no, and I just think that organizations. I spoke with someone recently who was saying that the CEO of their company had proposed the idea of putting a camera in so that everyone could be checked that they were working hard enough, which is so horrific a concept, and it totally misses the value of getting stuff done through relationships. And I think the more I feel like there's a positive move in this direction, but I think we absolutely have to recognize that success is achieved with great relationships. And how the hell do you build relationships if you're just talking about a spreadsheet? Um, and I mean, you're right. The connotations of gossip are. It would be lovely if we could. We need to come up with a word.
We do.
Need
Let's
to
create one.
redefine it. But it's so important to place ourselves in the community by understanding what's happening in all its riches to the others in our community. I think rather than organization, we should start talking about community because it's
Yeah.
warmer.
It is much warmer. An organization, again, is one of those words that comes up with like structure and hierarchy and power and people who have it and people who don't. And, you have to be at this level to be able to do this. Whereas a community is one that comes together for a joint purpose, isn't it? It's one that
Mm. Has a much
has
more
meaning
level
and
status,
connection.
doesn't it? It's
Yeah,
much more we all play our part rather than now I will pronounce what we're going to be doing in the next 10 days. That feels a bit old now, actually. We're sitting where I'm sitting, it does. I'd be interested to hear what people's lived experiences in their
yeah.
organizations.
I think some organizations still are in that mode. I think a lot of them have probably moved on or have the desire to move on, but not the structure or the kind of habits that really help people
Yeah.
to move on. So many organizations are looking for innovation
Mm,
and creativity. And for me, that starts with human connection.
I
When
agree.
you have those conversations and you spark an idea,
Yeah.
people very rarely, I think, I mean, I might be completely wrong here and I'd love to hear if I am. I think that people do not come up with fresh ideas necessarily that they're able to deliver on their own in a silo. It doesn't work like that.
No. No, and I love that. I don't know enough about it actually, but the principle of the coffee shops in the 18th century, where people would just come together and chew over ideas and would build on each other's ideas, and they would play out and expand and extend incredible stuff that would come out of those conversations, which could be held for hours, but are probably, culturally incredibly informative. And we're all in such a hurry. Everything is about well, like you said, getting stuff done, but actually, whilst that's important, we've got to kind of tip those scales back in favor of that's an important part of our working lives, but we must also value. We can't just talk about relationships. They take time, they take investment, they take kindness and thought and insight and understanding. And you can't just do that in 2 minutes of pleasantries at the beginning. How was your weekend? Good. Okay, great. So I need to talk to you about your pricing. I mean, that's just not a relationship build.
No, but the idea that everyone is in such a hurry, I'm always thinking like, a number of years ago now, but organizations used to, if you think about like a manufacturing type organization, some of them still do this. They, at 12 o'clock or 12:30, they all down tools and they all go for lunch together and they have a conversation within that. And then they go back to work and they work really hard and they get stuff done. But that built into that kind of structure of that day was time for conversation.
Mm.
And I think over however many years, we've eroded the power of the lunch break and the conversation that can happen informally. I mean, you see it, and I see it so much when I was going into offices and seeing people. And even now you see it, like people working through their lunch break, people not connecting because they're trying to get more and more and more and more stuff done
Yeah.
in the same amount of time.
And I mean, do you think, Beth, that is there some sort of sense of achievement from getting stuff done? Some sort of psychological safety from going, oh, I've had a long day, but I've got 10 things off my list, can feel much more satisfying. When you're having a conversation with someone and all you're thinking about is, oh my God, I've got to get everything done. I wonder if that just gets in the way.
I think it does. And I think also things like reward systems and performance management, if it's done in a way that rewards that behavior, people then continue on in that way. So
Mm.
think about it. If you get rewarded by, being there, being at work the longest, doing the most work, getting the most things off your to-do list, regardless of how well you've done them or how much it created a long-term impact or relationship or positivity,
Mm.
is that's what's driving that behavior. And I think you get into habits of doing that because it's rewarded or recognized,
Mm.
because people talk about, oh, they worked really, really hard. And that's a great thing. Well
Yeah.
done. Versus, imagine if people talked about, do you know what? They worked really, really hard over 2 years to build that relationship that
Mm.
has now created this amazing partnership for our business. And it was a long process and it did take time, and we didn't get to do that lovely feeling of ticking something off the to-do list until now. But
Mm.
it was so worth that investment. And I think sometimes it's about seeing things as an investment rather than an outcome.
Yes. And I love that sentence, because I just think organizations have fallen into a space where they value output over everything else. Output, outcome, it's all about that. And I understand that they have to satisfy, often, especially if they're public companies, they have to satisfy the shareholders. But, it feels like we're approaching the edge of that. We're going to have to do something slightly differently.
Yeah. And often short-term targets and short-term deliverables
Yeah.
versus in the long run, what is actually going to make our business, our organization, our charity, our social enterprise, whatever type of organization you work in, short-term thinking will lead to that kind of behavior
Yeah.
versus maybe giving people a bit of, you talked about it as like kind of opening it up and giving that space to create better conversations, which will inevitably lead to maybe more innovation, better results, better thinking, better products, better service.
Yeah.
And customers are crying out for better service, aren't they? So, but short-term thinking or doing things quickly very rarely leads to really good customer service.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm desperate to plug Kath Bishop's book, The Long Win, here, because actually you just
Yeah.
think that, maybe that's the start of really transforming our approach, because the relationship build has to be the way to help lift ourselves out of all of this. I think actually maybe that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and definitely, I was about to say the same thing. We were on the same path there because Kath is also on one of our podcasts, so you can go and listen to Kath as well, talking about the long win and how we can really change up what we look for and what the outcomes are, and to really change our perspective on short termism versus the long win. So definitely, good plug there.
Oh,
Love it.
it's so right.
It's just the right time. Um, the other thing I was just going to come back to, in one of the things you said, is about, and I love the way you put it, obviously, from your background in acting, the choreography of your day and how
Mm,
you do things. What are some of the things that people can think about to choreograph more opportunities to listen? So that's my first question. Probably
mm.
my second part of that is, when you've created the opportunity to listen, how can people listen really well?
Oh, so brilliant. I mean, I think actually this is something that being online does afford us, is the opportunity to choreograph a bit more. So for example, if you sign in to a conversation, let's say with 3 or 4 people, the objective would be to say, okay, let me be really clear that I would like to spend at least 25 minutes just finding out how you are, and then we can get on to our agenda or whatever. If you find yourself, I mean, where I'm sitting now, Beth, as I'm thinking, I'm looking out the window, it would be really important to say to my colleagues online that if they could see me, uh, I may look off to the right quite a lot. I'm not distracted. This is how I think. Just trying to help people by letting them understand the context in which you're having the conversation, where you are, what you're going to be doing, how long you would like to be spending on stuff. And actually, in terms of listening, I would say keep those conversations short and then collaborate on a document and then come back to the document for a further conversation instead of spending an hour after hour just chatting through on Zoom. But as a listening practice, I would invite people to think of what 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 is your approach to listening. And I'm in my book, I'm talking about 3 different methods of listening. One is listening to support, where you are just really openly inquiring. Tell me a bit more about that. What's up? Tell me how you're feeling. How's that going to play out for you? All of those very I would call them interested statements or questions. Then there's also a listening to solve approach. Sometimes we're listening, we get the answer really quickly, and we go, "Oh yeah, okay, great. I just need to tell them what they should be doing." And that's a less that's a less helpful way of listening. I mean, honestly, if you're listening to support, you're properly using curiosity. If you're listening to solve, you're just waiting for the gap so that you can dive in and tell people what to do. And then the third one is listening to switch the conversation back to ourselves. That's I can the number of times I might have said to someone, I was talking actually about running the other day, at which I am rubbish. And someone asked me about fitness, and I said, "Oh, I've been doing a bit of running, but I find it really hard." And then within a split second, the response was, "Oh my God, you find it hard. Wow. Well, let me tell you about when I was training for my first marathon. It was blah, blah, blah." So there's absolutely no intent there to find out about me at all. I don't blame her, to be honest, because what I've got to say about running, you could fit onto a stamp. But um, it's just that sense of seizing the conversation back to my agenda. So those 3 things I think are simple enough for us to look out for. Am I supporting? Am I solving? Or am I just switching it back to me? Which we all do. But I suppose my question would be, what's your intention if you're having a conversation? What do you really want to do? Do you really just want to give your opinion? Do you really just want to talk about yourself? I mean, my concern is that we've become so bad at listening that actually everyone wants to switch the conversation back to themselves because they're not being heard anywhere. Which I think, is why, for example, at the moment, at this time, the Samaritans, for example, are just overwhelmed with people who are desperate to talk about how this is for them, because
Yeah.
during the pandemic, if the moment you say, I'm really struggling at the moment, the chances are that the other person or people are going to say, oh my God, you're struggling. Well, let me tell you about me. So those would be, I'd say, a bit of choreography, make it really clear about how we can get the most from this meeting, make it short, and decide which of those three positions you're going to be in as a listener will be helpful as a starting point.
Yeah. I love the way you describe those three positions. And, we can all think of times when we've done the switch or done the solve, which is probably the mode we're in most of the time, I reckon. Solving because it gets it done quicker,
Yeah.
switching because we haven't had a chance to talk about ourselves. I work with a wonderful coach, and he always says some people just need a really good listening to.
Yes.
And some people you just need to sit and listen. I'm also wondering here about what is it that the other person is expecting from you in that time. So your intent and their intent.
Yeah.
And sometimes people want you just to listen to them, which I would put in your listening support category, right?
Yeah.
They just want somebody to listen to the challenges they're having. They don't need a solution. They don't need anything else. They need to get some stuff off their chest and
Uh-huh.
have that out there. Sometimes people come to you because they do want you to solve it. But if you jump in with a solution too quickly, it might not be the right solution, right? So you might be sitting there thinking, actually, I have done the listening to support. And now I'm thinking, do they actually want me to say something about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
And then maybe it's about getting curious about what they're actually looking for. So it's saying something like, and tell me if I'm wrong here in your world, saying something like, oh yeah, it's really fascinating hearing what you've been saying about that. Is this something that you want me to see if I can help you with,
Yeah.
or is it just a conversation for me to listen to? And it's fine. It's fine. It's cool either way. But I can jump in and I've got some ideas. Do you want to hear them, rather than
Yeah.
assuming that everyone wants to hear what you've got to say?
Absolutely, Beth. I think, and the question that I think is so powerful is what would be helpful, or how could I help you? I mean, the intention behind that is so generous, and actually, if we ask it in that open way, people can then say, actually, do you know what? Just being able to offload has helped, or, well, you've been in this situation yourself. Could you give me some advice? If you just have the generosity to be able to say, what would you find helpful? What would you find most useful right now? That's a really great way of finding out. And I appreciate the intent to go, oh my God, you know what you should do. I appreciate that, but it's often the least helpful.
I'm just thinking about your example of the kind of running thing there. What if the other person has said to you, oh, that's really interesting. What is it that you find hard
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
running?
I mean, do you know what? It wouldn't have taken me very long. Like I say, there's not much to say about my running, but it's just so frustrating when someone is clearly that uninterested in this case my experience. I find it quite hurtful, actually. And I mean, perhaps I find it hurtful because professionally I listen, and a lot of my friends are really good listeners, and I know it's not they don't mean to hurt me, but I just find if you say something about yourself, oh, I'm finding this really hard, and then it's swept away, I do find that, I find that hurtful. I find it really, I feel without value, and I know that's probably not the intention at all. But
But that's the difference between intent and how things come across. And
mm,
there's, I call it like there's often in conversations a kind of one-upmanship about who has
mm,
it worse.
yeah, yeah,
And so someone says, oh, I'm actually having a really challenging time. And I would say this, like, I don't have any kids, so I might say this to someone, you know, I'm finding lockdown a bit hard,
mm,
or I'm finding the situation we're in a bit hard, or I'm finding work, whatever it is, I'm finding difficult. And someone else might say, oh, but imagine how much worse I have it because I've got kids. And someone else says, well, imagine how much worse I have it because I've got kids and my kids' school has closed down because their bubbles burst. And you get into this. And the thing is, I always think that everyone's experience and how they're experiencing it and how they're feeling about it is valid.
mm,
And just because other people are in a different situation, which may be more complicated or harder to deal with, doesn't mean that the person who started the conversation, who then got one up, that their situation isn't as important
yeah,
or isn't worth the conversation or isn't worth listening to.
Yeah. And you know, Beth, I mean, that's such a great point. Do you remember, was it Monty Python years ago, or was it, I can't remember who it was. This is years ago, but there is a whole thing about I look up to him because he, you know, and then he looks down on me, but I look up to him. It was a whole kind of, it was hilarious. It was about status. And actually,
Yeah.
you've probably done this kind of work on status play. There's a great book called Impro by Keith Johnston. And he does all this work on status interactions, and you know, he says all those things are about one-upmanship, and you can play hours of games of just getting the one up, even if your friend rings you and you say, how are you, you old slapper, you know, which is meant to be funny, but there's an intention there at some deep level of playing the higher role. And I always found that work really fascinating well, as an actor, I found it fascinating, but I can see it in organizations now. You know, you can just, there's this slightly, you know, anyone that's interrupted or cut across in some way is experiencing a diminishing of their status, and we're not careful with other people's feelings in that way. I have to say, it was a revelation to me. I know I get frustrated by interruption, but one of the research articles I was looking at in my book was about types of interruption. And, you know, there are kind of cooperative interruptions, actually, which we're doing a bit here, which is kind of, yes, I want to add to that because it's such a good point. But then there's the disruptive ones, which just cut across. And you know, I'm sorry to say, I know a lot of my female clients, and I have to say, as a woman myself, you know, sometimes it's just to bat an idea to one side, to dismiss it or to reduce it in some way. You know, that is devastating to listening. You know, if you get trampled on and reduced in that way, you know, we check out.
Definitely. And I love the way that's described, the cooperative
Mm,
interruption. It's like where you get excited about something and you want to add to it, and it's part of the conversation. And that's
mm,
kind of normal human interruption.
yeah.
But a cut across or a diminishing of your idea or a it's not time to talk about that right now. Anything in that zone is really, really unhelpful, isn't it?
Oh, really unhelpful, and you know, much more long-term damaging, I think, than we realize. You know, it's just, it shuts the door in somebody's face, and that is not clever.
No. Because people then won't speak up again, will they?
No, no. But what they might do is speak behind your back. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you know, what we were talking about gossip earlier, you know, that can have a downside. It certainly can be, you know, it brings out our worst behaviors. I think, is it the Neuro Leadership Institute that talk about the importance of acknowledging status? And I think in their article, they've got a model called the SCARF model. I'm sure you're very familiar with it, Beth, but one of the first principles of the SCARF model in influencing is about status, and saying that you have to, as the brain is binary in the sense that it heads towards reward or away from threat. So if we feel
Yeah.
reduced in some way, we get this massive stress response, which you know, is very damaging. Of course, you know, a huge surge of cortisol will really affect our listening, because you know, that basically shuts it down. We're not there to listen, we're just there to attend to threat. So it's
Yeah. And
really
to
important to
survive.
acknowledge and support and encourage, even if it's difficult, even if you don't agree, you know, step into that, step into a place where you can thank someone for their contribution or recognize it. And then if you must, you can disagree with it, but it comes from a place of respect. That is so vital.
It's making me think of, in the world of drama, the you know, the improv thing, which is
Mm.
where you have to say yes and
Yeah.
and you're not allowed to disagree with somebody, you're not allowed to diminish what they've suggested, even if
Mm.
what they've suggested is utterly crazy.
Yeah.
You have to go with it,
Yeah. And
and,
build.
yeah, build from it. And the thing is, I think sometimes we get things joined up in our heads that shouldn't be joined up.
Mm.
You can disagree and still listen really carefully.
Yes.
But our brains somehow put these things together that if you disagree, you no longer have to listen.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. That's such an no, this person's talking rubbish. I'm gonna, think about something else. Actually, I don't think that social media is very helpful on this front because if you look at I saw someone define Twitter the other day as a place where crazy people get into fights that no one's going to win, because actually it's just the brevity of you're totally wrong and therefore you're an idiot means that all the complexity of debate is stripped away and it just becomes a slightly childish, playgroundy, my dad's bigger than your dad kind of conversation.
Yeah, it does. And the idea that because somebody has a different opinion to you, they're wrong and they're stupid
Yeah.
is just such limited thinking.
Mm.
They just have a different opinion. You might violently disagree with them, but just telling them they're stupid probably isn't going to work that challenge out.
Well, it's going to be a very unusual exchange if they turn around and go, "Oh my God, you're so right. I am really dumb. Thank you for pointing that out. I must change my point of view." Maybe I'll try that today,
Yeah,
but just see how it
yeah.
goes.
Just see how it goes. Because if someone calls me stupid, the thing I really, really want to do is to change my entire opinion on something and
Exactly.
agree with them.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and there's such a lot of this out there, isn't there? Such a lot of and I think, certainly from a research perspective, when opinion is so binary like that, you're never going to get anywhere. You've got to have somebody who is willing to say, "Help me understand. Help me, explain to me what led you to this point because I'm curious to find out." Then suddenly you get to hear a much more detailed picture, a much richer picture, and you may not agree, but at least you understand. Whereas I think this throwing stones thing is, we're not going to get very far.
No, definitely not. Right. It's been so fantastic to talk to you about all of these different subjects. And I think we could probably talk for hours about it. But we do need to end at some point
I know.
on the podcast.
No.
What I would love to do now, if it's okay for you, is to just fire some quick fire questions at you.
Okay.
Okay. You're on the spot now. Um, First question is for you personally, as an individual, what is something that's always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
Or oh, variety, actually, whether it's different conversations or different things to do in my day. I was so rubbish at school because it was the same thing every day and the same timetable every week. And my life now is full of variety, and that makes me joyful.
Brilliant. Love that. Um, and that spontaneity and not always knowing what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So exciting. I feel like half of our listeners now, this is one that will divide the crowd, total Marmite. Some of them will be like, yes, variety, spontaneity. And half of them will probably be like, it sends me into a panic, the idea of not knowing what you're going to do every day.
I
And that's the
know.
joy of work joy, is that everybody's different.
That's so funny. My youngest daughter, when she was little, 5 years old, she'd come and wake me up on a Sunday morning, often by just grabbing hold of my eyelashes and opening my eyes up. And then she would say, "Mummy, mummy, mummy, what are we going to do today?" I'd be like- and she and I are so different because I just let the day unfold, whereas she has a day plan every day, and
Oh,
she sticks to it, man, absolutely 100%. So it's very funny to have lived
yeah.
that. Sorry,
I
everybody.
like the idea of the child opening your eyes by your
Oh, she
eyelashes.
was a
That's
nightmare. God.
she's obviously more joyful than that now, though,
She was
than the
full of
eyelash.
joy, but largely because she's so persistent, she gets exactly what she wants from life. So,
Love it. What book are you currently reading?
I am reading a business book. Do you mean?
Business or or otherwise. Give us a yeah.
Well,
What are you up to?
I've got two on the go at the moment. I've just started Shuggy Bain, which won the Man Booker Prize and is beautiful. I mean, for anybody that wants to explore empathy, it's just a wonderful joy. Well, it's not joyful; it's quite sad. But I mean, I love misery lit. I'm afraid I do love a good torture story. So it's a fabulously written, beautiful book about a really difficult life. And then work-wise, I've been reading a book on relevance by Nina Simon, who's a museum curator in the States, but really interesting about how she curates and crafts exhibitions and experiences for people, not that the museum want to do, but that actually are relevant to the community and how you do that. So of course I've been fascinated by that for my own work on in communication, making stuff relevant.
Yeah,
Wonderful book.
that sounds brilliant. I'm gonna have to pick
Mm.
that one up.
Mm.
Um, Next question. Throughout your career, throughout your life, what's the most useful or helpful or the best bit of advice that you've had that you always come back to?
Oh, I can answer this immediately without hesitation because I've been a freelancer all my life. I've never had a job. And somebody very early on said to me, always enjoy downtime as a freelancer. Don't panic because, you can have a really busy period and then suddenly, well, for example, this year, a lot of your work can fall by the wayside. And they said, you just have to find a way of going, I'm going to make the most of this because it always turns around and it always does. And then you're always incredibly busy again and go, oh, damn, I should have really relaxed when I had the opportunity or done something different when I had the opportunity. So I've made a very purposeful decision all my working life to go, it's okay. And I'm going to maximize the opportunity of, being at home, not having to get up at stupid o'clock in the morning or whatever, and just really enjoying that time. And I have really loved the space this year, even though I'm not as I'm not as comfortable as I normally am, but but I'm not afraid.
No, I love that, and it's such good advice. To think about that space as to enjoy it and to relax and
Mm,
to know that there will be other things coming as well,
definitely.
and that you will be busy, and that then relax the
Well, do you know
downtime.
what? I
Brilliant.
remember my mum died when I was 23, and it was a devastating time for me. And I remember being so I mean, awful, horrible bereavement, terrible grief. But I do remember thinking one day, I know if I sat in this room and didn't move for 20 years, I would feel different at the end of that time. I know that I'm not going to stay this way forever. And actually, I'm by nature quite a joyful person. I'm optimistic. I try always to look on, well, I don't try, I just always look on the bright side because there is always a bright side. So I think that all kind of wraps up in the same spot for me, really.
Love that. And then for our listeners, what is one super practical bit of advice that you could give them that they could just go and do now, that's easy to do, that they can practice today, tomorrow, next day, next week, make it a habit, that you think might help bring them some work joy?
Well, I actually, what your listeners don't know is that you and I were having a conversation about dogs before we
Oh, yeah.
before we started to talk, and I have for quite a long time now been trying to get people in between meetings, in between conversations, to shake the old one out physically. Now, maybe you don't want to shake like a dog coming out of a pond. I fully understand that. But maybe it's a yawn and a stretch, or maybe it's somehow take 10 seconds to reset. And I just think we tumble from one thing to the other, and actually the stresses and strains of the day can really build. Whereas if you break that momentum just by physically changing your state, shake your legs, jump up and down, run up and down the hallway, I don't care what it is, but 10 seconds to go, how can I reset? And it's a very intentional um, process, just a habit. Make it a habit. It made actually when I had my first child, and my voiceover agent said to me at the time, she said, "My darling, if it all gets too much for you, take your best bottle of claret and lock yourself in the bathroom." So I'm not advocating that, but mentally I am advocating that. Just a moment of going, it is literally, Beth, it's literally 10 seconds. Breathe out, breathe in, shake it out, start again. That's the way to do it.
And it's like freeing your mind by giving yourself some physical freeing as well. So
Yeah,
it helps your brain, but you're doing something, and it's so easy, right?
yeah,
Because at the end of a call, you could just stand up, shake it, do
exactly.
whatever you want to do, stretch, yawn, and then get back on the next one.
You
But it
will
might
feel
just be
totally
that 10
different,
seconds.
totally different. Because actually, if you think about it, we just sit in the same position for hours and hours and hours, ending one call, starting another, ending that call, starting another, or even back in the office environment where we go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and it's usually our head is full of what are we going to be doing, blah blah blah, when actually just press the reset button and start. You know what it's like as a performer. It's saying the same lines night after night after night after night. You have to find a way of pressing the reset button so that you are as fresh for this new audience as you were for the one the day before, and as you will be in 6 months' time. So that's a discipline, but it's one that really pays off, I think.
Yeah, and it's an easy one, right? It's a
Yeah,
discipline, but easy.
yeah,
You don't have to think about it too much. You can just do it. You don't have to do loads of research or loads of writing or anything like that. Just get on
exactly.
and do it. I'm going to start practicing that every day. I'm
Yeah.
going to do it. I'm going to commit to that one.
Lovely
I love it.
image. Can't wait.
The thing is, like with me, I'm an all or nothing person, so this will be a full like entire body shake it out for me. There won't be any kind of like casual, like slightly subtle yawning. It will be crazy. Maybe I'll do a little video of myself doing it and put it on Instagram or something. But
I
we'll
think that would be
definitely,
very helpful, Beth, to set us an example. And actually,
yeah,
why
maybe
not?
you could film one as well.
We can start a movement.
Yeah. Hashtag shake it off. We should do it.
Perfect.
My final question from me is, where can people find out more about you, your writing, your philosophy, your work?
Well, I have a website, www.voicepresence.co.uk. And I also have another website, which is in development at the moment, which is going to be for my book and all things listening, which is www.listeningshift.com, listeningshift.com. Oh God, these things are so complicated. But either of those will find me. I'm also on LinkedIn, Janie Van Hool. And God, I'd just love to hear from anybody with any ideas or comments or want to have a chat or anything. I'm here to listen.
Brilliant.
Hey.
And what we will do is put your links to both your websites, etc., onto the webpage so that people can click on them
Lovely.
and get to know you a little bit better.
Oh, that would be joyous.
Janie, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Once we've finished off here, I'm going to go and shake it out and make it happen. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you to Beth. You Beth, it was such fun. It was a lovely conversation, and you spark that joy. I think I've loved it. Thank you for your time.
What a great conversation that was with Janie, and I do hope that you enjoyed it and took something from it. It's all about taking those little things, experimenting, trying things out. I really like Janie's advice about how we can all be more intentional and share our intentions with others about what we're hoping to achieve in our conversations, especially when so many of those conversations are happening in the online world versus in the face-to-face world at the moment. I also loved her advice about choreographing our day and making sure that we put space in where we have time to listen. For me, the 3 different types of listening and how simply Janie explained them are going to land in my mind and sit there for a while. And I sit here thinking I'm so guilty of doing some of those things myself, and I'm sure we can all think of examples and times where we've rushed in to solutionize or to take it back to our way of thinking or to get the attention back on us. And finally, for me, the shaking it out. I am totally going to shake it out. I'm going to put a video of me on the Insta doing it, and I'm going to try that every day and see what a difference it makes, because I love a quick and easy, low effort solution to things. So let's all give some things a try. And thank you all for listening. Do let us know what you think. Get in touch with us on the Insta at Create WorkJoy. Maybe share your videos of shaking it out after a meeting or a conversation. Thank you.